Hey, how are you guys? This is Sean again, and wanted to talk today about a topic that used to kind of plague me in many ways, and that's procrastination. And it's something that we all do, and it's very understandable because, as I may have mentioned before, human beings primarily have two motivating forces: to avoid pain and to approach pleasure. So avoiding pain would be like not burning yourself on a hot stove. Approach pleasure would be like eating an ice cream, for example, assuming that you can eat ice cream. Right? So, because that's the case, we tend to think about things that we need to do in the future in ways that maybe aren't so helpful. Because if you think about, let's say, writing a 20-page paper for school or for work or whatever it happens to be, in the moment, we're going to assume that that's painful. Now, one of the biggest problems I think with being human is that we tend to think in the short term. We have the ability to plan in the long term, but it actually takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of time, a lot of willpower. And it wasn't until about a year ago that I realized the value of planning. That if you sit down and plan out in as much detail, not too much, but in as much detail as you feel comfortable with, what you want to happen throughout the rest of your life, and you could just take, a chunk of a week. After you've planned that out, everything becomes a lot easier. It's actually a lot more simple because you already have an action plan of what to do. The only question is whether you do it or not. So planning is really interesting. But again, the problem of procrastination, I think, is that, again, we're being short-sighted. And we're looking at the pain in the short term instead of what we should be looking at, I think, is the pain in the long term. Because I think for a lot of the things that we procrastinate on, there are long-term ramifications that are quite serious. For example, if you procrastinate on your taxes, that's going to have some serious long-term effect, especially if you do it over and over and over again. I believe you can only get extensions so many times, or maybe that's not accurate, but there's going to probably be some long-term effect from that. Here's some real practical ways, or one at least practical way, that I think you can start to work around procrastination. Something that's really helped for me is to start to think about yourself in the future as someone completely different than you. And this idea has come up lately that it's difficult for us to take care of ourselves for some reason, especially men. I don't know why. But for some reason, we tend to think more highly of others, I think, than we think of ourselves. And if you think about that for too long, it starts to become really interesting. And there might be some explanation in there of us being social animals and that actually being a good thing. And at the same time, we need to also recognize that if we don't take care of ourselves, who's going to do it for us? I mean, yes, we have loved ones in our lives, but that's really not their job. Our job is to take care of ourselves. So proactively getting medical checkups, for example, or dental checkups. I think that's a really good example of how to treat yourself if you think about yourself as someone completely different, who's maybe a best friend of yours, this person in the future. I think it makes things a lot easier to do for yourself because we have a lot of baggage, again, around doing stuff for us. But what if it's someone else in the future that you like? Would you save more money? Would you brush your teeth more regularly? Would you keep your house in relative better order if you knew it was for a good friend of yours who actually happens to be just you in the future? Future you, who's not actually real yet. And it turns out never actually becomes real because there's always a future you, right? So that's what I offer you today. I offer you maybe a change of mindset. That if you think about yourself as a good friend, that there might be ways that you stop procrastinating. And I've noticed this in myself. And there might be ways that you're more willing to do some work up front so that future you has a better time of things when that time comes. And it's a really personal thing, It's a really personal thing to have goals in the future for you that you want. So I'm also advocating that that's also a good idea, because if you don't have goals, then you don't quite know what to do in the meantime. And it turns out if we don't set goals ourselves, society will end up setting those goals for us, and we'll just kind of fit into one of those slots. Not necessarily a bad thing. However, I would argue that probably most people want more control over their lives than that would tend to offer. So 5-minute mornings, tell me how it's going. And hopefully this was 5 minutes or less. Something tells me it's probably not. Let me know if you have questions. We'd love to chat, start a dialogue with you. And until next time, I'm coming up on a weekend, so Monday. I'll see you Monday.